What do you think governments can do to put Canada on the right road to a cleaner future and help support manufacturing in the adoption of clean technology?
Well, I think I touched on one example was encouraging domestic content in new initiatives like electric buses, electric trucks, etc. If there is if a subsidy does exist, which is a tune that is being followed south of the border and elsewhere. I would also agree with some of the comments other speakers have made. With respect to our pace of change here has been disappointing. So we really need all hands on deck on every sector, whether that be on the generation side. As Robert mentioned, we're at 80%, but that really should be going. There's no reason we can't be closing on 100% on electrification of the vehicles. There's no reason Canada can't follow Norway's model and do even better than that with domestic production of these technologies. And there's no real barrier for us to succeed and become a wealthier, more prosperous country if we do a good job on this. Now, if you don't take a leadership position and you take a follower position, we will end up being only being a raw material supplier to other countries who then provide us the goods to solve our problems. And that, in my mind, is not a good solution.
No, it's not. And I just wanted to pick up a couple points that you're mentioning, Raj. I mean, it occurs to me in terms, there are precedents, right, in Canadian policy history around encouraging Canadian production, right? Think about the Canadian arts and culture industry, right? Bigger than forestry, by the way. That doesn't exist without Canadian content rules. So, whether it's on radio, whether it's on television, whether it's on in film. And so, it's pretty radical policy, but it's not without precedent, and it's led to a successful industry. But I think more broadly than that, look, Accelerate's 2 months old now, Daniel, I think that's about right. And so I'm new into this role. I'm struck by the lack of coordination across the federal and provincial and municipal governments on these kinds of files. Not everybody, but a lot of these governments want to position themselves as global leaders in electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles. Great. I mean, your heart's in the right place, but they don't seem to be talking with each other, and there doesn't seem to be any coordinated strategy. Now, part of our role is going to be helping that transition, but at the same time, again, something that's not without precedent in Canadian history is a lack of coordination across governments. And so, that's a huge opportunity for people to be working together, figuring out where the strengths are across the country, and figuring out how to fill gaps. And I think even if we were to move the dial 10% on that, we'd probably be much further ahead.
If I can, go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say, I think I'd add that, what's going to drive investment in manufacturing is a market, fundamentally. And that's really where the key is. And I just will touch on something that Matthew said in terms of, because of our decentralized nature, that many of the provinces hold a lot of levers in these areas and that we're not coordinated. We have to recognize that Saskatchewan alone does not represent a market that's going to attract manufacturing. Even our bigger provinces, when you're sitting next to the United States, is not necessarily going to be on its own. And so the idea of having a more, not necessarily a nationally imposed approach, you can't have that, but more consistency, more collaboration, as was talked about, a more strategic approach as for the country as a whole is going to be critical. And I'll just use one quick example. We've all talked here already about, Canada has a commitment to move to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Fantastic, sends a very strong signal. The federal government has been very consistent in voicing that. We have provincial governments that have never mentioned net zero by 2050. And it's not clear that we are actually all on the same page or all working towards the same objective. And we need to build that consensus, because once we have a common objective, we have tremendous potential if we collaborate together to create economic opportunities in this country.
One thing I would like to mention is the fact that what worries me is that if we don't show leadership, we will end up losing jobs in Canada. For instance, in the automotive sector, if we don't show leadership in building a supply chain for electric vehicles from light to heavy duty, well, they might very well end up being made elsewhere. So Canadians will buy products, technologies, batteries, vehicles made either in Korea or China or Europe or in the US. So to me, that's a very important issue, because we want to fight climate change and create jobs, or do the job transition as well. And we all know, and I think that you have to be blind not to see this, that the oil and gas sector is going to go down as time passes by. So we want to make sure that we do help these workers transition from jobs in the fossil fuel industry to the renewable energy industry to the electric mobility industry. And that's something that's really important. Canadian government does, not only the federal, but provincial governments do as well. When Rajekar mentioned being inspired by Norway, I find it interesting that when we talk about being a global leader, because I've been hearing this a lot the past few years regarding electric mobility. If you look at the second quarter electric vehicle sales in Canada, we're at about 5%, 10% in Quebec, 13% in BC. In September of 2021, we're at 20% EV sales in China, which is the largest market in the world. So it means a lot of electric vehicles. 22% in France, 30% in Germany, and 91.5% in Norway. So by the spring of 2022, Norway will be at 100% EV sales. So for us at 5%, we're so far away from the leaders in the world that we need to go a lot quicker than we are right now. And what's happening south of the border is something of great interest and great preoccupation to our members, because we're looking at the Build Back Better plan from President Biden. What this could do is, in fact, really hurt the automotive industry in Canada and the EV industry in particular, meaning that since they want to give particular rebates for electric vehicles made by unions in the US, what that may mean is that potentially Canada will build the last gas vehicles in North America. And when that dies down, our industry will die down. Because right now, these announcements that have been made by Ford and GM and Stellantis, I am pretty sure that right now there are discussions in those offices saying, well, do we still want to keep building these vehicles in Canada if we get more of a rebate, because the same vehicle will be built in the US? I can tell you that one of our members, Unifor, is really thinking about this, and APMA as well, and Lion and Flow. So it's very important for us to see what's happening south of the border. We want to be leaders. We want to collaborate with the US, especially with what's happening in China, what's happening in Europe. But right now, there are issues at play which are preoccupying, to say the least, for our industry.
If I can I want to just make a couple points, kind of echoing a couple of things that you said there. I mean, you mentioned the conventional oil and gas and energy transition. So we are a vendor into the conventional oil and gas business, and we make all kinds of pressure vessels and heat exchangers and piping systems for that industry and others. And what I think is really important is that from a government point of view, what can government do? It's provide us with some clarity and some kind of roadmap and some kind of certainty, because especially for small and mid-sized manufacturers like us, we look out at the market and say, where does our future lie? I happen to believe it's in clean tech, but there are lots of people who think, well, we're going to keep going with conventional oil and gas, and we'll wait till that industry comes back. And so some certainty requires coordination among the provinces, but some kind of long-term certainty and roadmap. Like if you look at Ontario as an example, we had a cap and trade system, and another government gets elected and that gets thrown in the garbage. So, now we have, carbon emission targets from this government. Maybe next year we have a different government and all that gets thrown in the garbage. So, some kind of as long-term, you can't really be long-term about these things, but some kind of consistent roadmap across the country and among the provinces that says, look, this is where we're going. So it makes sense to develop these technologies because this is where we're headed long-term. It makes sense to pivot your business to these emerging industries because this is where we're going long-term. So I think that kind of coordination or roadmap is really important. And I don't think we've really seen that. I think we see a lot of competing visions of the future. And it's unclear which one's going to win out. Long term, I think there's only one, but we may go through a lot of pain before we get there. The other thing I think is if we have that roadmap, I think we need champions. We need to champion our supply chain, like you guys have said. In Canada, we tend to be really shy about Canadian content and rules like that because we don't want to have conflict with our American neighbors or other trade partners. But no other countries are shy about it. I mean, every other country fosters their homegrown industry and has, the domestic content requirements. I think our governments should have some supply chain. They should definitely have preferential supply chain treatment for Canadian companies. And, I think they need to put in some policy requirements around that kind of thing. Even if we look at border adjustment on products coming in from countries that have, a poor record on environmental performance, maybe we need something like that. But I think our governments need to be a lot less shy and a lot more bold about, what they want to incentivize and what they want to grow and, put some teeth to these things. Otherwise, like you said, we're just going to be followers. We're not going to be leaders.
And if I just add, Robert, you'd said something really interesting earlier. I mean, the market's going to dictate this to a large degree, and a lot of the focus, maybe it's a Canadian thing, maybe it's not, is on what government can do, and it's really important, and we're working with government on that too. But look at where capital's going, right? Where's investment? It's in the short term, I get there are energy crises and oil goes up and all that kind of stuff, but the long-term trend is not that way. And investors want a more sustainable business model, and they know, particularly the big investors, the pension funds and the sovereign funds, and so they know where the puck is going. And I think we would be wise as a country to keep an eye on that puck and take advantage of those opportunities. And a part of that, of course, is government policy.
Yeah, I think one thing the Americans have is they have the Department of Energy. We have NRCan, which spans probably too many sectors. Some sort of, and to Dennis's point, governments change, and so you need a cohesive, some cohesive and long-term thinking, and that can't, in my mind, probably doesn't come from a democratically elected policymaker. It probably comes from a long-term goal driven by a bureaucracy that stays in place.
Well, I would add that beyond the market, we need regulation as well to make sure that we reach our targets, because it's one thing to set targets, quite another to reach them. Without regulation, I don't think we can make it. I mean, I remember back in 2005, when the federal government announced that they were signing a voluntary agreement with the OEMs to make sure that they lower their greenhouse gas emissions of the light-duty vehicle fleet by 5.2 megatons. Well, between 2005 and 2010, in fact, they lowered it by 0.26 megaton, which means that they missed the target by 95%. So to me, market is one thing, regulation is super important as well.